so happy that JJ and Duncan and Richard are here because they're fantastic people.
You're saying that when you're meeting these beings, there's no sense of reality that we can put them into. So there's a initial scream, trauma, disconnect with reality.
Many of the meetings with so-called ET intelligence, I also include this to include ultra-terrestrial UT intelligence, are so overbearing that the psyche can be fragmented, and this is why it is necessary in some cultures to have a shaman or spiritual guide or a person of great sensitivity who can guide the person into the next stage of personal evaluation, personal understanding. We are in this process of interacting with cosmic intelligence, some call the cosmic others. And there are so many different levels and so many different scenarios that are possible. You need a real holistic grounding, and without that holistic grounding, you have mental vacuums.
That's why this film is so valuable as a kind of primer for a mass population.
This is, yes, the bottom line of your film, James. You have interwoven here really outstanding viewpoints of pioneers in the field who've been there for many, many years and realize this is a tapestry, a mosaic of all of us rediscovering that we are not alone, but we are part of a greater family, plural, of life forms.
When we meet the other, it's not like you're going to sit around and have coffee with these beings. I mean, why don't you pick up on that, Richard? Because you and talking about the UFO mind and talking about the way society needs to adjust to the disclosure contact process.
Sure. Well, I think that we really struggle to grasp what we're dealing with, and that's one of the reasons why there still hasn't been this open acknowledgement, because I don't think that we're operating on the level that these other beings are operating on. They deal with us, it seems to me, on the terms that they choose, by and large. And, one thing that I've noticed in speaking with quite a number of people who have had, what I think are genuine experiences with these other beings, is that they are traumatized. It's not always an awful experience, but I'll just give you a couple of generic examples that are totally true. A woman who had an experience 40 years ago. She's a highly sophisticated, accomplished lady, a prominent writer, and had not spoken to anybody for 40 years about what she had experienced until I got to speak to her. And she started hyperventilating 2 minutes into our discussion. And her heart started racing, and about 5 times I had to say, just slow down, slow down, slow down. And it took a long time to get through it. Another guy that I interviewed, a truck driver, had an experience 30 years before, same thing, and he had not spoken to anyone. When they start reliving what they dealt with, it's so difficult for them to talk about this. They've gone through something that they don't really know how to process. They've not felt that they could speak to other people about this, not spouses, not even best friends frequently. And so they dealt with something, and there are others as well, of course, who've dealt with things that are beyond what we're normally accustomed to dealing with in our waking life. And so think about, when I was trying to puzzle through this whole after disclosure scenario, one of the things I kept running into was how would this affect our whole culture if it comes out and admitted what many of us already know, which is that there are these others that are here. And I can't but think it would be an utterly revolutionary kind of event in our culture.
Like nothing we've ever seen before.
No,
yeah.
I mean, we think about the JFK assassination, we think of 9/11, and I think this would be, really, without diminishing those, this would be beyond that. It would redefine who we are, and then it would also reinforce the point that we're not at the top of our food chain. Not that they're here to eat us, but that there are other beings who have got significant advances over what we have in so many ways.
I think
yes,
yeah.
Richard, you made a great contribution at that citizens hearing in Washington. On the panel was Linda Moulton Hall, who said something very outstanding. She mentioned a story conveyed to her regarding a U.S. Military officer who had a face-to-face encounter, and she said, to quote, it would be like 7 feature films
3D.
in 3D in color, blasting away inside the brain. And I'm thinking back as she was saying that to a book written by the famous Cindy Sheldon called The Doomsday Conspiracy. I was the scientific consultant for that film, and that book actually wasn't made into a film. It was considered too far out, but
That's a very fine book.
it dealt with the life, although this is fictionalized, of a U.S. naval intelligence officer in Switzerland who has this encounter with the ET, and Sidney used the expression of 6 levels of information coming through. I thought that was quite significant because Sidney Sheldon did have some remarkable experiences, and he was interested in bringing this book out for the public.
Well, that's why I think it's so. Did you have something to say?
Well, I just wanted to add, because I realized your original question was something that I didn't address, and JJ just kind of like sparked me. We're really, I don't think that we're really at the level, or as a society in general, that we're ready to deal with this reality, but that's not going to stop it from happening. That's the whole thing. It's like, I often feel like no parent's ever ready for their first child, but that doesn't stop the child from coming. And, but boom, there it is. And then you have to just roll with it. You have to learn, you have to deal with it. And this is going to happen. And most people, we all have family, we all have relatives, and we know they're not all on the kind of page that we're on. They live in a totally different reality. And I ask myself, in our society, are there any things in our society, our culture, our politics, our media, that are getting us ready for that? And I think not really, but it's going to happen. This is an inevitability. It'll be a tremendous shock. I think a lot of people will be kind of traumatized by the new reality, but I think many people will do.
Well, that's why I call my program New Realities. But I think we're fortunate to have Duncan here because you have experienced those realms. It has been mind-bending. You've had to adjust back into a kind of human sphere. Can you talk about that process of encountering and being traumatized in a sense and having to readjust back to this reality? Or maybe...
Yes, I was in a number of research projects back in the 70s and 80s that actually created a fixed time loop back into the 40s, which was a experimentation during wartime called the Rainbow Project Philadelphia Experiment, where a certain X amount of people were back there in the 40s and in the 80s. And part of the dynamics that happens during a processing out of this physical realm, what I know, there are 12 potentials in this realm that come in and can manifest. There are certain local realities and consciousness that steer this inertia and framework. We're moving in a direction. There's a local collective consciousness. When someone steps out of that collective, there's almost a snapping back.
Because it's not allowed. I mean,
Well, it's not allowed. It's because we have this elemental part of us that is in our subconscious, the animal. It's way down in the subconscious, 9th and 10th subconscious, that actually is scanning everyone here, the animal, which is a protective hunker down, food, sexuality, is scanning here for our safety and health and welfare.
So you experienced realities that were incomprehensible to the human mind in that sense.
In a sense, my training basically was, I was next to a nuclear detonation device that blew out my psyche. So what was happening linearly in time was happening simultaneously. There wasn't an accounting of, what I know of time is movements moving in a particular direction with a reflection back, an accounting of it, and therefore validating this physical existence.
I think you just blew out my psyche.
When you don't have as a voice is reflecting off the wall, if there's not a reflection back, there is not an accounting of one's existence.
So it's an annihilation of ego sense.
Could be.
I mean,
but what I'm driving at is this physical reality in the direction we're moving, we're continually to processing it and helping it. We've actually got to what I know from some of research with Preston Nichols. We're actually out, we've gone through this process 7 times all right. As a reality, we backed down and we started again. All the records have been erased, folks. We're on the 8th term, which is kind of infinity.
I think we're going to make it this time.
And consciousness is rising. So the idea is to try to be conscious of your surroundings, what you're doing, where you, and bring up that animal part of you, which is not the food shelter. Basically, it's your sensory mechanism of your body. Anyone here, if they just step aside, it's body positioning. 18 inches either side, wherever you stand or sit, adjust that way. Because your body, that 3D, the ego part of you, is going to position you in a familiarity in this physical framework, this time inertia. Step out of that by just moving a foot 18 inches, and you're more connected to who you truly are.
Duncan, you've had like 13 abductions. Could you just briefly mention some of those experiences?
Yeah, most of mine having to do with the military. I was groomed for a number of experimentations. It had to do with making sure I was online to be somewhat traumatized and abused in order to get to the point where I would accept information and commands without questioning, which is a perfect military person.
Right. I want to talk about the military, and we'll kind of go another round, and then we'll have questions from the audience, but I don't know about the MyLab, what they're calling the military abductions. It seems like maybe the ETs can be masquerading as military, because it seems like if they are military abductions, they have to be part of a whole other arm of the secret arm of the military. What do you say about the military abductions?
I think that there are military abductions, but I don't believe that they're taking part as an aspect of the formal U.S. military structure.
Okay.
So what you have in the intelligence community, I think many of us are aware, in the black budget community, are called special access programs. And that's your primordial black budget program, which has little to no oversight. And then within that structure, you have what are known as unacknowledged special access programs, which means that they don't exist, but of course they do exist. And what we also know is that most of those programs are very privatized. So that military personnel are not always involved. You've got, our military's got truck contractors dominating it as anyway. So within those very, very deeply clandestine, compartmented programs, this is where I am firmly convinced that there's probably a number of ET-related programs, and I do believe that there are military abductions. My suspicion is that they involve people who are of interest or of value, either in the sense of having had ET contact, or in the sense that they have psychic capabilities that are of value in gathering intelligence.
That's why they contacted you for your psychic capabilities, right, Duncan? Was that?
Yeah, in a sense, if the protective layers, everyone has protective layers within their mind function that's standardized. And this gets very quickly into sexuality, which is some of the research in some of the black ops, is to have someone go into a physical resonance of the body, and whether it's physical sexuality or not. ESP is down in the 3rd and 4th level of subconscious. Most people don't sleep deeply enough there. And part of that process, when a person comes to physical resonance or an orgasm, just before a person goes off physically, the mind opens up, and in that open state, information can be brought down in. A lot of people at the night after, hey, this is great sex, but I don't feel good. They're actually taking on patterns of the other person because they're in that open state.
Well, you're talking about we have to redefine ourselves, who we are as human beings, and this is the work of Dr. Hurtak at the Academy for Future Science. So, a
lot of popular writers have written about the Philadelphia experience, I should say, /experiment.
Yes.
And there's a lot of apocrypha. People don't know whether this is real or disinformation by government insiders. Some years ago, when I moved to Northern California, I discovered, because of my interest in space research, that one of my neighbors was Robert Truax, who was highly involved with naval intelligence, and I did talk to him privately. I can quote him by saying that there were paraphysical experiments that did take place.
What does that mean, paraphysical?
Well, the government, i.e. the Navy, during World War II did understand the importance of using the powers of the mind, we called psi, PSI, to begin to see how one could open up a whole new dimension to cosmic reality. And certain experiments did take place, too numerous to go into right now, but getting back to the subject, which is the film, this is just one of many segments that goes into the great mosaic that we have to see, is unfolding a higher scientific reality. To put it in a few words, the whole definition of scientific truth is being challenged. A whole new ontology of the sciences is being forged. Everything is up for grabs.
Right.
And this is Richard's great contribution to really see that there is a systematic control mechanism on some levels, so that information does not get into the public commons. And we have to challenge that with better science, future science, and consciousness reality.
Well, that's what I'm saying. The consciousness has to shift if we're going to accept these realities. And that means the definition of who we are has to shift, because we're not just this linear being, which, Duncan's experience sort of shows that we're multi-dimensional sense.